So today we are basically continuing with chapter 11, and yesterday we looked at the concept of mental health, and we talked about what is mental health, what are the differences between mental health problem, and mental disorder, and what are the range of different factors that can influence a person's mental health in terms of biological factors, in terms of psychological factors, and in terms of social factors. So basically looking at the biopsychosocial model. Today's a really short topic, and it's probably not going to take us more than 15 minutes. It's essentially just looking at the characteristics of a mentally healthy person. So if you are to be classified as someone who is mentally healthy, what are the kind of general characteristics that you will see in people who are mentally healthy, who are mentally functioning to a level that is kind of normal and that is kind of healthy? Okay, so the main three characteristics that are mentioned in our study design are: number one, a person who's mentally healthy has high levels of functioning. Number two, a person who is mentally healthy has a good level of social and emotional well-being, or social and emotional health. And number three, a person who is mentally healthy has a good level of resilience to life stresses. And we did kind of touch upon resilience in chapter 3 when we talked about stress. And for those of you who are doing health and human, you would have come across words like social emotional dimension of health and well-being, and as well as resilience. Okay, so that's like a cross curricular or cross subject connection there. Okay, so these are the three main characteristics of mentally healthy people. So let's look at a definition for each one and just some examples so we can have a better understanding of what each of these mean. So the first one is high levels of functioning. So having a high level of functioning basically means that you are an independent person, okay? You are an independent person, you are a productive person, and if you put your mind to doing something, you are usually able to achieve that particular thing. So essentially what that means is that you are able to set particular goals or set particular objectives, and you're able to work towards achieving them. Okay, so that's what we mean by high level of functioning. A high level of functioning means that you are independent and that you can fulfill any of your goals. Now, people who have high levels of functioning, they generally tend to have better mental health because they are essentially, a little bit more engaged, okay, whether that's socially, whether that's in terms of mentally, they think in a more positive way and have a positive mindset. So essentially what that means is that these people not only benefit their mental health, but they also benefit other areas of their health as well, like their emotional health or their social health. Okay, so just to give you a few examples, people with high levels of functioning generally tend to show the following characteristics. Okay, it doesn't mean that all of these have to be met in order for a person to be classified as having a high level of functioning. But generally, people who have good mental health and who are mentally healthy tend to show at least one or more of these particular characteristics. So number one, they tend to have a higher rate of participation in. They tend to have a high rate of participation in extracurricular activities. So extracurricular activities could be things like, if you're at school, it could be things like debating, it could be things like sports, it could be anything that's kind of extracurricular, like you apply to be SRC, you apply to be the school captain, okay, you apply to be, you involve yourself in some kind of program that's raising money, or you involve yourself in some kind of initiative, okay? So essentially extracurricular activities, anything outside of your general academics, okay, that you are engaged in. And it doesn't have to be within school, it can also be outside of school, okay? So a lot of people outside of school, they volunteer, or they might be running like a social media platform to increase awareness of certain social issues. So all of that is extracurricular stuff. People who have high levels of functioning are generally more likely to have a good level of social support because they tend to focus on developing high quality, positive relationships with other people. Okay, so obviously they are focused on achieving these positive relationships, and they are able to benefit from the good that comes out of those relationships. Like I said before, they tend to set goals, and they don't just set goals blindly, but they set goals and objectives, and they systematically and productively work towards achieving those goals and objectives, okay? And as we're going to learn about later in this outcome, there's something called self-efficacy, which is about your ability to set a goal and to work towards achieving that goal. Okay, they think clearly and rationally, and they generally tend to think in ways that are positive rather than negative, or rather than ways that are irrational. They can regulate their emotions, okay, which means that they are able to control their emotions. They are able to balance their emotions out, not feeling angry all the time, not feeling upset all the time. Even with happiness, they know that happiness is a fleeting thing, okay? It's not going to always last forever. And when they do get upset, they don't get worked up about it. They know that being upset and being happy just forms the balance of emotions that everyone has. And like we said before, it's a big focus on looking after yourself and being independent. So independence is another characteristic of someone who has a high level of functioning. Now, there are two certain behaviors that we look at that can actually influence a person's functioning level. The first behavior is adaptive behavior. Now, if we look at the word adaptive, if you adapt to something, it means you get used to that particular thing. It means that whatever situation you're thrown into, you're able to adapt, you're able to adjust. Okay, so adaptive behavior is a good thing. And a person who has adaptive behavior is basically more likely to have a higher level of functioning compared to a person who has a maladaptive behavior. Maladaptive behaviors are behaviors that people might show that's actually going to not allow them to adapt, not allow them to adjust. And for that reason, they can actually affect the normal functioning of their daily life. So I'll give you an example. An example of an adaptive behavior might be something like, if you've got VCE exams coming up, you're working towards, studying for each subject, you're making your revision notes, you're asking questions. If you've got VCE exams coming up, an example of a maladaptive behavior might be, just sitting in bed all day, playing games, not focusing on studying, not catching up with the work that you've missed or the lessons that you've missed. All that kind of stuff doesn't allow you to function properly in terms of studying for your VCE, and obviously is not allowing you to adapt to that new stressor, which is VCE and the upcoming exams. Okay, so generally people who show more maladaptive behavior are likely to have lower levels of functioning compared to people who show adaptive behavior, okay? So adaptive behavior, you've got high levels of functioning. If I show maladaptive behavior, I've got low levels of functioning. So just remember that link there. Okay, so that's what high levels of functioning is about. The next characteristic of a mentally healthy person is social and emotional well-being. So social and emotional well-being is just kind of two concepts grouped into one. So social well-being is obviously about our relationships with other people, okay, our ability to form those healthy relationships, as well as how we socially interact and communicate. Okay, so the social interactions is also important. Emotional well-being is our ability to express our emotions, control our emotions, manage our emotions, and regulate means to balance out our emotions, making sure we're not always angry, we're not always upset, we're not always, we understand that we are going to experience a wide range of emotions there, and we balance it out. So people who have high levels of social and emotional well-being tend to have more stable mental health. That means that they're more likely to have quality relationships with others, which is an example of social. They are able to express their worries or concerns, which is obviously connected to our emotional well-being, because being worried is an emotional state. Seeking advice more readily, which is connected to social support. So that's, again, a social example. Have a wider support network during times of stress. So obviously your support network might consist of your friends, your peers, family members, cousins, all that kind of stuff. So that would come under social. And feeling more self-assured in one's own presence and with others. So this is kind of more emotional because it's talking about your sense of security and feeling self-assured and feeling like you've got some stability there. Okay, so essentially that's what social and emotional well-being is about. People who have social and emotional well-being, they know how to control their own emotions when they're alone. And when they're not alone, at least they've got people around them, which is the social well-being side of it, who they can then turn to, who can then support them, be an avenue or a platform for them to vent their worries and vent their concerns. Okay, so social and emotional well-being is really important, and people who are mentally healthy, you will realize that they always have a really good social support network, and they've really got a good way of managing their emotions. Remember, no one's perfect, so no one's going to have a perfect social network or a perfect way of managing their emotions, but they do the best that they can, and it works for them. So that's basically social and emotional well-being. And we've got a few more examples on the next slide here, just to give you, because obviously social and emotional well-being are such broad concepts. So I want you guys to just have a read through this, maybe in the next session as well. We'll just quickly run through just a few examples, just skimming through. So social well-being, you know, we can talk about family and friends. We can talk about how we resolve conflict, okay? We can talk about how we manage relationships that are unhealthy or that are problematic, okay? We can talk about how we engage with our cultures, okay? How do we socially interact? What kind of relationships we have? Okay, all that kind of stuff is what comes under social. Emotional well-being is about regulating your emotions, being able to control your emotions. So when you get angry, are you able to control your anger? Are you able to control, you know, your emotions like sadness or disappointment? Are you able to identify emotions in other people? So if you see someone who's really upset, you know, about maybe about something like their pet has died or something like that, you don't go up to them and start talking about how you're so excited to get a new cat into the house. So that's like not being empathetic, obviously. So you understand and you can recognize emotions in others and you can change your behavior accordingly. You can basically live and work independently. You can basically take responsibility for your actions. You can also obviously make decisions without being too worried or without getting too upset about those decisions that you make. So these are just some examples. Again, you don't need to know everything, but just to give you a broad idea of what these two are. If I'm going to ask you to give, just to learn the examples, I would say learn at least maybe, just going to the next slide, sorry. So maybe just learn at least 2 examples of social behaviors that come under social and emotional well-being, and 2 examples of behaviors that come under a person who's got good emotional well-being. Okay, it's really common sense when you think about it. It's just a matter of just linking that back to how it allows someone to be mentally healthy. Okay, and the last characteristic that we're looking at today is called resilience to life stresses. So resilience to life stresses is basically the ability to cope with and adapt to life stresses. And this is going to result in a more positive state of mental functioning. So resilience is something that doesn't just happen, but usually we can see someone's resilience when something really bad happens to them. So for example, if someone has just experienced the loss of a loved one or the loss of a long-time pet or, you know, the loss of a friend. So all of these things are really big burdens. They're really big stresses and they're really big life events, okay, that are going to be hard for the person, that is going to cause them quite a bit of impact on their mental health, a lot of stress, anxiety, and grief. So resilience is your ability to be upset by that. It's normal to be upset if your pet dies. It's normal to be upset if you lose a friend. We're not saying that you shouldn't show those emotions, but essentially what it means is you don't allow that event to bog you down for the rest of your life and keep you down. So eventually you are able to bounce back, okay? And that's what we say resilience is. Resilience is that ability to bounce back after you've experienced some kind of stressor or some kind of stressful event in your life. And you're not allowing that stressor to essentially take over and ruin your life or to get you down for the rest of your life. You are going back to a state of functioning, okay? A state of positive mental function. You are able to go back. It doesn't mean you're going to be happy 110% of the time. You still live with that pain. You still live with that grief, but you are able to still, for example, go back to school. You're still able to resume your work or your job. Okay, you're still able to look after the rest of your family members or look after the rest of the pets that you have. Okay, so essentially what that is, what resilience is talking about is the ability to bounce back and to cope with and adapt to those life stresses that you have. Eventually coming back and returning yourself to a state of restored positive mental functioning. We say restored because we presume that during the time that you were experiencing the stressful event, your mental functioning was highly disrupted or interrupted. Okay, so now with resilience, you're able to restore it back to a more or less positive state of mental functioning. Okay, so you look at this picture here, it says, do you bend or break? So sometimes some people in the face of stress, in the face of stressful events, they bend. So like this tree that's kind of bending in the wind, they bend, but then once the wind is gone, they kind of prop themselves back up, okay? They spring back up, back to normal functioning. Some people don't just bend, but they break. Break means that they essentially are completely broken down by what's happened to them, and they then allow that to get them down for the rest of their life. And that is not mentally healthy. Okay, so it is important for a person to be able to come back to mental functioning once they have, taken a little bit of time to accept that this has happened, to accept that they've gone through this stressful experience. They need to come back to a state of mental functioning. And people who have poor resilience are more likely to develop mental disorders like depression. Okay, so if I have a pet and the pet dies, and I am like grieving at home for like 6 months, not going to school, not going to uni, not going to work, that's a clear sign of dysfunction. That is a clear sign of impairment to my daily functioning. And so as a result of that, I might be classed or classified as having the symptoms to diagnose me to have as having major depression or any other mental disorder. Okay, so sometimes if you don't have resilience to life stresses, mental disorders can precipitate as a result of that. Okay, so that's resilience. We do have a little bit more detail on the next slide. So just giving you some further examples of what resilience looks like. Resilience is basically saying this too shall pass in the face of adversity. Okay, you can show resilience by either adjusting to the stressor, so accepting it. Okay, in most cases, especially when we talk about things like death, like the loss of a loved one, the loss of a pet. If I have a pet and the pet dies, I can't really fix that issue, can I? I can only accept it. I can only accept that, okay, everyone dies at some point. Maybe I'll meet my cat in Jannah, etc., etc. Okay, you just accept it. Okay, so essentially you just have to accept it and learn to deal with it and just understand that death is a fact of life. In some cases, or with some life events, you can overcome the stressor. So let's say that you didn't do too well in the first few SACs for a certain subject, and that really stresses you out. That really becomes something that is always on your mind. So that's something that you don't have to simply accept. That's something that you can actually go in and address and fix by doing more practice questions, by watching more Edrolo videos, by asking more questions in general. Okay, so that's stuff you can overcome. So depending on what kind of stressor you're going through, whether it is something more intense like death, or whether it is something that can be actually addressed and fixed through actions and behavior, we can either show resilience by adjusting to the stressor or by overcoming the stressor. Okay, and this is going to be dependent on what type of stressor we are going through to begin with. Okay, so it's obviously dependent on the actual stressor. It's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. It will be dependent on the actual event or stressor. All right, so people who show resilience in their lives, they tend to be more satisfied with their lives. Generally, we, if something really bad happens to us, but we are able to either accept it or we're able to work towards fixing it, we will feel more content. We'll understand that there is a reason why everything happens, and you generally don't allow that to bog you down. They tend to have higher self-efficacy. So we mentioned that this is about working towards their goals. Okay, especially if it's a stressor that you can overcome or you can fix, they start to make like an action plan for how they're going to do that. So, okay, I'm going to watch more Edrolo videos. I'm going to make sure that I submit my learning activities on time. I'm going to make sure that I ask the teacher more questions in class. I'm going to revise the PowerPoints more frequently. Okay, I'm going to buy more study guides so I have more questions to do. So all of that stuff is working towards your goal if your stressful event is not doing well in the SACs. Are more optimistic. Okay, people who show more resilience, they're likely to see the bright side. Okay, so hold on, I think I forgot to point that out. So in the previous slide, there was a picture. Yeah, there was a picture of a bunch of flowers growing in an area that just looked really drought stricken, where there wasn't any soil. And that's what resilient people do, and that's what they are. They see the positive in the negatives, and they're able to look on the bright side. People who are resilient have hope for the future. Okay, and they're generally more flexible and realistic. So they're not like, oh my God, my cat has died, it's the end of the world, I'm next, blah, blah, blah. They actually are a bit more realistic, and they tell themselves, okay, well, a cat's life expectancy is this much. My cat already reached it, so it was only obvious that it was going to pass away at some point. It's okay, we had good times, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so resilience is a really good protective factor against the development of mental disorders as well. Okay, so generally, if you have resilience, you're not only likely to be mentally healthy in general, but you're likely to be protected against the development of certain mental disorders, okay, because of these characteristics that we've just gone through. Cool, so that is basically what resilience is about. It's the ability to bounce back and come to a state of relatively positive mental functioning after a period of time in which you were stressed, in which you were anxious, or in which you were grieving. Okay, that's basically the end of the content for today. So I'll just first stop the recording here.